Giovanni Battista Piranesi was born in 1720 in Venice, a city already shaped by stone, water, and engineering ingenuity. From the beginning, his environment exposed him to architecture, not as abstract theory, but as lived experience. Venice itself was a paradox, a city that should not exist, resting on water, yet filled with monumental structures. This background is important because it shaped how Piranesi perceived space, scale, and construction. He did not grow up seeing buildings as static objects, but as systems that interacted with gravity, water, and human movement. This early exposure would later manifest in drawings that feel less like artistic fantasies and more like explorations of structural logic taken to extremes. Piranesi trained as an architect and engineer. Before becoming widely known as an engraver, this detail is often overlooked, yet it is central to why his drawings continue to unsettle historians. He understood load-bearing systems, arches, vaults, and foundations. He was not merely imagining spaces, he was calculating them, even if only mentally. When he moved to Rome in the 1740s, he encountered the ruins of the ancient world on a scale unlike anything in Venice. Massive broken arches, collapsed vaults, and fragmented columns filled the landscape. For most visitors, these ruins were romantic relics. For Piranesi, they were evidence of a civilization that had mastered construction at a level modern Europe had not yet matched. Rome at that time was a city layered with history. Ancient structures stood alongside medieval buildings and Renaissance additions. Piranesi began documenting these ruins obsessively, producing highly detailed engravings that emphasized scale, depth, and texture. However, even his earliest works already show signs of exaggeration. Columns grow taller, shadows deepen, and perspectives stretch. This was not simple artistic flair. It was a deliberate choice that made the ruins feel overwhelming, almost oppressive. Viewers were not meant to admire them comfortably. They were meant to feel small in their presence. As his work evolved, this sense of scale intensified. His famous series, often referred to as the Imaginary Prisons, depicts vast interior spaces filled with staircases, bridges, platforms, and mechanical elements. These spaces appear architectural, not abstract. They obey perspective rules, structural logic, and material behavior, yet they also seem impossible. Staircases lead nowhere, arches intersect at improbable angles, and platforms hang over abyss voids. Historians have long debated whether these images represent psychological states, philosophical metaphors, or pure artistic imagination. What complicates these interpretations is how technically convincing the spaces are. They look buildable, even when they feel uninhabitable. Unlike fantastical art of earlier periods, Piranesi's drawings do not rely on mythical symbols or dreamlike distortions. Instead, they rely on engineering realism pushed beyond conventional limits. Stone blocks appear heavy, metal railings look cold and rigid. Light behaves consistently, casting shadows that reinforce depth and distance. These details suggest an author who was thinking in 3 dimensions, not merely decorating a page. This realism is what makes the drawings so difficult to dismiss as fantasy alone. Another key factor is Piranesi's attitude toward ancient Rome. He openly challenged the dominant belief that Greek architecture was superior to Roman construction. In his writings and drawings, he argued that Roman engineers possessed a deeper understanding of materials, infrastructure, and scale. His engravings often portray Roman ruins as remnants of colossal systems rather than isolated buildings. Aqueducts stretch endlessly into the distance. Foundations appear deeper and more complex than expected. These depictions imply that ancient construction knowledge may have been more advanced than 18th century scholars were willing to admit. This perspective placed Piranesi at odds with many of his contemporaries, while others idealized harmony. In proportion, he emphasized power, mass, and endurance. His Rome is not elegant, it is overwhelming. This distinction matters because it suggests that Piranesi was not simply romanticizing the past, but interrogating it. His drawings ask an unspoken question. How were these structures actually built? And why does modern society struggle to replicate their scale and durability? The debate intensifies when considering how Piranesi blended real ruins with imagined extensions, many engravings. Historians can identify specific ancient sites, yet those sites appear expanded, deepened, or structurally intensified. Walls become thicker, arches taller, and spaces more labyrinthine. This blending creates ambiguity. Where does documentation end and speculation begin? Because Piranesi never clearly labeled these boundaries. His work exists in a gray zone between record and reconstruction, but this ambiguity may be intentional. By refusing to separate reality from imagination, Piranesi forces viewers to confront their assumptions about history. If the imagined extensions feel plausible, then perhaps the official understanding of ancient construction is incomplete. Drawings quietly undermine the certainty of historical narratives without openly contradicting them. Asterisk. as Piranesi's work matured. The scale of his imagined spaces began to exceed not only artistic convention, but architectural plausibility as it was understood in the 18th century. The interiors he engraved were no longer simply large. They were immeasurable. Viewers could not easily locate ground level, a ceiling, or a central axis. Instead, space unfolded vertically and horizontally at the same time, creating an experience closer to immersion than observation. This effect was not accidental. Piranesi manipulated perspective with extraordinary precision, stretching vanishing points and layering structural elements in ways that guided the eye endlessly inward. Makes this particularly unsettling to architects and engineers is that these spaces obey structural logic locally, even if they defy it globally. Individual arches are correctly proportioned. Staircases are realistically inclined. Bridges appear to carry load. There are no floating stones, no impossible materials. Each component looks as though it could be built on its own. The impossibility emerges only when all elements are considered together. This suggests that Piranesi was not ignorant of engineering limits, but was intentionally testing them. The famous prison series exemplifies this approach. Chains hang from stone beams that appear capable of bearing weight. Winches, pulleys, and scaffolding are integrated into the architecture, implying function rather than decoration. These are not ornamental details meant to fill space. They suggest activity, labor, and purpose. Yet no workers are visible, or if they appear at all, they are dwarfed by the structures around them. Humanity exists only as a measure of scale, not as a controlling presence. Historians often interpret these prisons as metaphors for the human mind, political oppression, or existential anxiety. While these interpretations may hold symbolic value, they do not fully explain the technical realism embedded in the drawings. Symbolism alone does not require such rigorous consistency in material behavior, light, and structural form. Piranesi's attention to these details implies that he was engaging in a kind of architectural thought experiment, asking what happens when known construction principles are extended beyond conventional limits. One of the most debated elements in these drawings is circulation. Staircases intersect, reverse direction, and lead to platforms that seem disconnected from any clear destination. Yet each staircase is drawn with careful attention to proportion and support. Handrails align with steps. Landings occur at reasonable intervals. This suggests an internal coherence, even if the overall system lacks a clear purpose. Some scholars argue that this reflects a critique of rational planning, while others see it as an exploration of complex systems that exceed human comprehension. Light plays a critical role in reinforcing this complexity. Piranesi used dramatic contrasts between light and shadow to emphasize depth and mass. Light sources are often ambiguous, filtering in from unseen openings, high above or far beyond the visible frame. This creates the impression of vastness without requiring explicit boundaries. From an architectural standpoint, this implies enormous volumes and openings that would require advanced structural solutions to support. Once again, the question arises, was Piranesi merely imagining, or was he extrapolating from real examples he had studied in Roman ruins? Many Roman structures, such as baths, basilicas, and substructures, featured multi-level spaces with complex circulation and massive vaulted ceilings. Piranesi documented these extensively. It is possible that his imagined spaces are not inventions. He may have been asking what ancient engineers could achieve if their principles were pushed to their theoretical maximum. If so, his drawings function less as fantasies and more as speculative reconstructions of a lost architectural language. Asterisk, another source of debate lies in Piranesi's repeated emphasis on substructures and foundations. His drawings often focus on what lies beneath rather than above. Arches support, arches platforms rest on layered systems of vaults, and deep voids extend downward beyond visibility. This focus aligns with Roman engineering priorities, which valued foundations, infrastructure, and durability. Modern architectural depictions rarely emphasize these hidden elements, yet Piranesi brings them to the forefront, suggesting their importance. The absence of clear ornamentation in these spaces further complicates interpretation. While Piranesi was capable of exquisite decorative detail, many of his imagined interiors are stark and utilitarian. Stone surfaces are rough. Metal elements are functional. This austerity reinforces the sense that these spaces are not palaces or temples, but machines of architecture, designed to endure stress, movement, and time. In this context, the prisons may represent systems rather than places, structures built for purpose rather than comfort. Engineers who study these drawings often note that while individual components are plausible, the cumulative load would be enormous. Supporting such vast spaces would require materials, techniques, and organizational capabilities that challenge conventional timelines of technological development. This observation leads to uncomfortable questions. if these spaces are Piranesi's time, were they also implausible for ancient Rome? Or does our understanding of ancient engineering underestimate its capabilities? Piranesi never provided definitive answers. He rarely explained his intentions, allowing the drawings to speak for themselves. This silence has fueled centuries of debate. Some view it as artistic freedom. Others see it as strategic ambiguity. By refusing to clarify, Piranesi preserved the tension between what is known and what is possible. His work invites interpretation without settling into certainty. As debate around Piranesi's drawings intensified over time, a deeper and more uncomfortable question began to emerge among historians and architects alike. What if these images were not purely speculative at all? What if they were informed by knowledge, observations, or sources that no longer survive? This possibility does not require assuming lost civilizations or forbidden technologies, but it does require accepting that historical understanding is often incomplete. Piranesi lived at a time when many ancient structures were still partially buried, dismantled, or reused as foundations for newer buildings. He had access to layers of Rome that are no longer visible today. Unlike later archaeologists, Piranesi did not approach ruins with the goal of preserving them in their current state. He approached them as systems to be understood, measured, sketched, reconstructed, and compared fragments. When he encountered collapsed vaults or truncated walls, he did not see failure. He saw clues. From these clues, he extrapolated. His drawings may therefore represent not imagination, but reconstruction, filling in missing sections based on structural logic rather than surviving stone. This approach would explain why his spaces feel coherent even when they appear impossible. They may reflect how ancient engineers solved problems of load, circulation, and durability at a scale that later centuries struggled to comprehend. Roman infrastructure, such as aqueducts, substructures, and bath complexes already demonstrate an ability to manage massive forces and volumes. Piranesi's work may simply extend these principles inward, underground, and beyond the fragments that survived into his era. The academic discomfort surrounding this idea is understandable. Accepting that ancient builders possessed a deeper mastery of engineering would complicate linear narratives of progress. It would challenge the assumption that technology advances smoothly over time. Piranesi himself contributed to this discomfort by openly criticizing the dismissal of Roman engineering as crude or inferior. His drawings function as visual arguments, asserting that Rome's greatness lay not in decoration, but in structural intelligence. Over time, institutional responses. 2. Piranesi's work subtly shifted its interpretation. Rather than engaging with the engineering implications, many scholars reframed the drawings as psychological or symbolic. The prisons became metaphors for anxiety, imagination, or the sublime. While these interpretations are not invalid, serve to redirect attention away from the technical precision of the work. By emphasizing symbolism, the drawings could be safely categorized as art rather than evidence. This reframing also aligned with changing tastes. As neoclassical ideals favored clarity, proportion, and restraint, Piranesi's overwhelming spaces became inconvenient. They did not fit neatly into emerging architectural doctrines. Instead of being studied as speculative engineering, they were admired as expressions of creative excess. In this way, the unsettling questions his work raised were softened over time, yet the drawings themselves resist this simplification. Modern architects and engineers who revisit them often notice details overlooked by earlier commentators. Structural alignments, consistent material behavior, and rational circulation patterns suggest intentional design rather than chaotic fantasy. Digital modeling has further revealed that many of Piranesi's spaces could exist in theory if built with sufficient resources and advanced coordination. The impossibility lies not in physics, but in logistics and scale. This realization reopens the question of intent. Was Piranesi imagining what could be built if constraints were removed? Or was he documenting a language of architecture that once existed and had since been forgotten? Never claimed to invent a new style. Instead, he consistently rooted his work in the authority of antiquity. His inscriptions, references, and contextual framing all point backward, not forward. Another layer of complexity arises from Piranesi's influence. Later, architects, artists, and thinkers drew inspiration from his work, often emphasizing its emotional power rather than its technical implications. Romanticism embraced the feeling of vastness and ruin. Modernism selectively absorbed the idea of exposed structure. In each case, Piranesi's drawings were adapted to fit contemporary narratives, further distancing them from their original context. As centuries passed, Rome itself changed. Excavations, restorations, and urban development altered or erased many of the ruins Piranesi had studied. With the physical evidence gone, his drawings became increasingly difficult to verify. What could not be confirmed was often dismissed. This loss of context may be one of the reasons his work feels so enigmatic today. We are seeing fragments of a conversation without access to all the original references. Piranesi emerges not as a creator of impossible worlds, but as a mediator between visible ruins and invisible knowledge. His drawings occupy a space where history, engineering, and imagination intersect. They do not demand belief in lost technologies, but they do demand humility about the limits of modern understanding. The debate they provoke is less about what is true and more about what we are willing to question. In this sense, the enduring power of Piranesi's work lies not in answers, but in pressure. His drawings apply pressure to historical narratives, forcing them to account for complexity, ambiguity, and loss. They remind us that what survives is not always representative of what once existed, and that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.